Dara O'Brien.
And gives me great pleasure to speak on this bill. And I think, Minister, and I'd like to commend Deputy Willie O'Dea for bringing it forward. And as he said, he's covered certain items of it in the 6 minutes or so that I have before I pass over to my colleague, Deputy Butler. There's just a couple of items that I would want to raise. And I know you, in particular, Minister, are very familiar with the issue of pensions, because you would have had quite a hand in some of the undermining of the pensions benefits over the last 5 years, particularly in your role as Minister for Transport when you brought forward the State Airports Bill, as it was at the time, and Section 32 therein, which was the first time a government actually legislated for the reduction of benefits in a private pension scheme, and that was the Irish Aviation Superannuation Scheme, the Airport Pension Scheme, which was probably, of any of the injustices done to any pension scheme member, and I'd speak as someone who's actually worked in the pension sector for 15 years before entering politics, was probably the most, where you had long-standing service members who lost 60% of their pension entitlement, retired members, people 70, 80 years of age, lost 6 weeks of their annuity, and all for selling the stake in Aer Lingus effectively, because what was allowed, and the company were allowed, they were shown a roadmap of how to actually increase your pension deficit with a view from getting permission to wind down your scheme. And that roadmap has been followed up to now. And I think during the Social Welfare Bill of 2016, when I think Minister Joe McHugh, the Minister for State, was in your position, you weren't here for that part of the debate. One of the striking things about the Social Welfare Bill 2016 was the fact that it had nothing about private sector pensions in real terms. I am trying to actually think of any previous government, and there were many mistakes made in pensions, that did more to actually undermine pension provision than the previous one. Deputy O'Dea has mentioned the €2.6 billion plus taken out of people's savings by way of the private pension levy. Then you had the Social Welfare and Pensions Bill of 2013, brought forward by Minister Joan Burton at the time. A number of the amendments, actually, none of the items included in the bill here today were ones that were voted down at amendment stage, at committee stage of previous social welfare bills. But that is unfortunately the position we find ourselves in. And what I would ask is one element of it, and it happened first in the State Airports Bill, the pension section of that bill, whereby scheme members now can be moved unilaterally out of their pension scheme without any permission. So it doesn't matter what their benefits were, how long they actually stayed within the scheme, how much they paid into the scheme. If they can be unilaterally moved out of their scheme into an inferior arrangement, i.e. out of a defined benefit arrangement into an inferior defined contribution scheme. And that happened 15,000 people in the airport pension scheme, moved out without their permission. So in Section 2 of the bill produced by my colleague Deputy O'Dea, we have put in the right to appeal, that members would have, if the majority of members disagreed with that, they would actually have the right to appeal. We'd like to go a step further to say that they could actually stop that, but at the very least an appeal would go to an independent authority. And that was something, again, that was put forward as an amendment at committee stage in a previous social welfare bill that the previous government opposed. There are in other countries, and in other more countries that are more concerned maybe with the preservation of people's pension rights, you wouldn't actually be allowed to wind the scheme down unless it had met 90% funding standard. So unless there were money actually there to pay out to the scheme members. And Deputy O'Dea has covered a number of items, particularly about how we calculate the liability. That's nuts. That's got to change. Absolutely crazy. But my big concern over what's happened in the last 4 or 5 years is we have given most employers every employer with a defined benefit pension scheme a roadmap to wind down their scheme, and that's what actually has been done. This bill would redress that somewhat and go some way to fixing that. I would like to see us go further. I would like to see us go further with redress for people like the 15,000 workers in the airport who, for the sake of €342 million, which the previous government trousered through the sale of the state's stake in Aer Lingus, lost up to 60% of their pension benefit. You've seen what's happened with Waterford Crystal workers when they went to the European Court. My colleague will cover that. But this would be a start in undoing some of the items that were done over the last 5 years. I would like to see us go further. My colleague has produced other legislation about banning in future any private pension levy. That would not allow any future government provide that levy. But we intend to continue on this course of trying to protect workers and pension scheme members' rights and trying to ensure that unscrupulous employers are not going to actually remove people's pension rights, remove the benefits that they've built up over time. And I'd ask you in this context, Minister, to think about what the situation would be in the public service, and I include all of us in that, whereby if you were coming to a year to retirement and you expected a retirement pension of €40,000, and you were told then, within weeks of your retirement, it would be €12,000 per annum, or less, and in some instances, or nothing. Now, double insolvencies happen. Companies do wind up. Companies become insolvent. In those instances, yes, you have to wind the scheme down. In many of these instances, and included in this bill, would mean that if a company were solvent, it would have to actually get permission to wind down the scheme. I'd like us to go further on it, but this is a starting point, and I would hope that this bill would pass its second stage, and that as colleagues across the House that we could work on strengthening this piece of legislation and providing more protection and actually rowing back on some of the retrograde steps that were taken over the past 5 years.